live with contradictions. You can't transcend them. You live with them, you talk about them, you get them out, and you say, let's try and alter the circumstances so that those contradictions are minimised. That's what happens in food policy. That's what good food policy.
So when you were accused back in the 80s of being food police, food terrorists, food Leninists, make you chuckle?
Oh, laugh! My colleagues at the Food Commission were so upset. I laughed and laughed and laughed, and our riposte is still good. We are food lentilists, not Leninists. So here we are. Welcome to my...
Well, it's bubbling away.
House. We're now going to have a food lentilist soup.
Lovely, thank you very much. This is lovely, this dal soup. What do you think of Britain's food culture now? Do you think that it has undergone a revolution?
There's not a revolution, but there's the beginnings of a really remarkable improvement in how we think about food and what we think about food. But it's patchy. In some areas it's gone further and more advanced, and in others it's gone backwards.
Is that a class thing?
Partly it's a class thing, but there's no evidence that I see of poor people not wanting to eat as well as rich people. They just lack the wherewithal for it. Although there is now this interesting study from the Food Standards Agency arguing, to a lot of people's surprise, not least my own, that somehow the poor are not eating any worse than anyone else. We're puzzled by this because there have been lots of studies saying something very different.
At the start of the new millennium, the Blair government replaced the old MAF with the new DEFRA and announced the creation of the Food Standards Agency, very much to restore public confidence after the food scandals of the 1990s.
17 minutes to 7. It's the first working day of that long-awaited thing, the Food Standards Agency. After long campaigns by consumer groups and much politicking and power struggles in Whitehall. Our Consumer Affairs correspondent Nicola Carslow now examines whether the high hopes for the agency are likely to be realised.
It's all about faith in our food, a massive task to restore confidence in what we eat, and then confusion and conflicting messages about what's safe and what isn't, what's good for you and what's not.
Ministers stress it will be independent, not just of government, but of the influence of food producers, which critics say the Ministry of Agriculture has always been vulnerable to.
Tim's was one of the many voices heard during the consultation period. Along with Eric Milston and Mike Rayner, he submitted a paper exploring the different forms an agency could take. Over our Lentilists' lunch, I asked him how successful he felt the resulting model has been.
Eric and Mike and I always had reservations about having an arm's length agency. Politicians made it clear. The idea of it is to have political blue water between us and they. We need to make it independent. We said there's got to be some policy and political control over this. We've just had in the row about the Food Standards Agency funded and requested study about the impact of additives on children's behaviour. We've had a brilliant example of why this arm's length body is actually problematic, because it's not listening to its own evidence of the need to do something different. There's not that policy involvement.
I mean, would you not, with hindsight, have felt happier being directly part of that process?
I don't think so. I don't think that's my forte. Actually, government, you have to be much more focused than I am. I'm always thinking on the one hand this, on the one hand that, what if, how do we marry this issue with that issue? Actually, that's not a very useful skill for government. You want government to govern. You want companies to deliver. That's not my forte.
At times, Tim Lang can seem an enigma, difficult to pin down. So what exactly is his forte? I turned to his colleague at City University, Dr. Martin Caraher.
He's a visionary. He can pick up issues and pick up topics before they even begin to emerge. And he's more laterally moved on to issues of food and the larger ecology and sustainability around food. 5 years ago, nobody was doing this. Now we've got government commissions. We've got the opposition looking at this. It's a global issue with World Health. And Tim picks up issues like that and runs with them and gets people to think about these things in a very strategic way, not just a reactionary way. In terms of actual effect, I think we'd probably be hard pushed to name some successes. I think our successes and Tim's success is keeping things on the agenda, while people just want to ignore them.
You've talked about enlightening the consumer, but isn't the problem with all of this that in many senses you've picked the wrong target, that we can't change things, that there is a structure in place, and no matter how we shop, things aren't going to change?
I think that's a fair question, but it's not a charge that certainly I would accept. The arguments, certainly in the London Food Commission era, we were translating ourselves into consumerist terms. Absolutely right. Was that the be-all and end-all? No. And if you look at what we wrote, we were talking about the structural issues. And I think one of the many reasons I went back into academia after think tank and campaigning work was because I wanted to contribute to improving the understanding of those structural factors. You cannot have a cornucopia in your supermarket of 26,000 items of food and not be raiding and pillaging the earth. It is not possible. We could not have a hypermarket system as we have it in Britain and roll it out worldwide and feed 9 billion people. There isn't enough land, there isn't enough water. You can't have the high-fat, meat-eating culture that we've built in. It's ecologically impossible. So the structural issues, I think, are now exposed.
I mean, people always talk about choice now in this age. Well, what choices do we have? Where should we be applying them?
The big fight now is between choice-led individualism, this narrow view that Simon Parkes or Tim Lang can single-handedly alter the supply chain by buying fair trade or eating healthily. Fair trade tea or coffee compared to what the Russians and the Chinese and the Indians do. This is absolutely piddling. The coming tension in food policy is between the choice ethic and what the food industry is beginning to call choice editing. It's a
choice editing.
Choice editing. A phrase where actually, if you want to get food that's low in carbon, low in embedded water, fair traded, we have to have someone deliver that for us. This was the argument behind the cooperative movement in the 1840s. We will build a system which delivers something that you can then trust. The point is that the big supermarkets, the big food companies and farmers are beginning to realize that, but the policymakers haven't caught up yet. And that is the role of food policy academics like me, is to help them catch up very fast, because my God, we're going to need to catch up in the 21st century. The challenges ahead are immense, and if we get it wrong, we blow the planet.
The food program was presented by Simon Parkes and produced by Rebecca Moore.